Hi and welcome. My name is Alex Cooley, and I want to begin by thanking you for investing in your continued learning. And in fact, learning is going to be one of the things that we'll be talking about together in this particular session. But as you know, the entire focus of this series of programs is practical skills for leadership and management. So where we're going to track together is through 9 sessions examining this as a key concept. And session 1, today's session, will be about leading yourself. And my argument would be that you really have no right to lead or manage others if you haven't yet learned to lead or manage yourself. And in fact, if you do a fairly quick search on the internet, if you do a fairly quick search of the leadership and management literature, you'll find that most thinkers in the field will start with you. How do you set yourself up to be the best leader or manager that you can possibly be? And then the flow through from there will be that in episode 2 we'll talk about bringing others on board. So how do we get others to become followers, if you like? Because you most certainly can't be a leader if you actually don't have followers. From there, in episode 3 we'll talk about getting things done. Well, in essence, what we're really going to be talking about is what is the science of productivity? What do we know helps you achieve the optimal results in your particular setting? And what do we know actually doesn't work? Because there are some very counterintuitive learnings that we've got from the field of productivity. From there, we'll go on to talk about visions and setting goals. And these days, almost everybody will talk to you about having a vision for your leadership. And in fact, again, I'll be touching on that today. So we'll talk about how to develop a great vision, how to develop a vision that will pull your team along with you. But also, what do we know about goal setting? What works, what doesn't work? Again, there's a massive body of work around this whole concept of goal setting, and we could spend day after day after day talking about what we know about goals. So I'm going to narrow it down to some key important messages for you that you can use in your workplace today. And from there, in episode 5, we're going to go on to talk about coaching as a leadership and management tool. Most leaders and managers across the planet these days are being asked to coach, but there's a huge challenge with that. The vast majority of coaching models don't take into account the different dynamics that you have in the workplace. They don't take into account the pre-existing relationships that you have with your direct reports. They don't take into account when Billy says, "Hey, I don't want to be coached." How are you going to deal with that? So in that particular episode, we'll nut all of this out, and I'll introduce you to a framework that you can practically apply the very next day in your workplace that takes into account all of those complex dynamics. And again, following on from that, we're going to talk about influence and persuasion as a tool. If influence and persuasion are really the key tools that managers and leaders use, and particularly if you want to describe yourself as a leader, you really need to understand the nuance of influence and the nuances of persuasion, and what's different about the two concepts, and how can we use it incredibly well. What I won't be talking about is sales. So this is not a lesson, if you like, on how to sell well. It's how to bring people on board as willing participants striving towards the vision that you've already created. And then we move on to the importance of strengths and values. Again, in most leadership and management training these days, people will be talking about values and strengths, and they'll talk about you should use people's strengths and you should have common values within the workplace. But practically, how do you do this? And what about the areas where people's strengths don't take them where you need to be. So we'll nut all of that out, including what is a value and what is a strength. Because the reality is, when you ask most people, they can't clearly articulate the difference between the two concepts, and does it really matter? In episode 8, we're going to talk about motivating human beings, and what do we know about this whole concept of human motivation. And it's evolved and it's changed. So the old idea of the carrot and stick evolved some time ago, and there was a new way of looking at motivation. And then on top of that, we've got a science now that's taken us to a completely different space in understanding what really motivates people in the workplace. So we're going to nut that out together, and I'll talk about, again, practically what difference does that make in the workplace for you, and how you can actually use that the very next day. And finally, in episode 9, we're going to talk about the whole concept of employee engagement and disengagement, and why rewards actually are sometimes the worst way of motivating people within the workplace. So having explored motivation, we'll go on to this whole concept, as I say, of employee engagement, because I'm sure anybody in a leadership or a management role has heard across the planet again this talk about how do we get employees to the stage where they will give that discretionary effort, employee engagement if you like. So all of that's where we're going to go, and during each session, including this one, I'm happy to share with you the science, but really what I want to do is talk about what you can do personally differently in the workplace. So the slant, if you like, is on a practical takeaway. So every episode will end with a number of practical takeaways and commitments from yourself, hopefully, to actually make a difference. So as we look forward, we're going to follow that pattern. We're going to start with you, and we're going to track through what you need to know about your followers. But the starting place is you. As I said at the outset, the reality is you'll never be the optimal leader that you can be. You'll never be the optimal manager you can be if you don't start to focus on yourself first. The tendency is to focus on the broader group, the people you're leading, the team you're managing, your colleagues, your peers, even the people that you report to. As human beings, we have a strong tendency to focus outwards, and we often forget to focus on ourselves. The skills, the knowledge, the training that you've had that's got you to where you are now has got you to where you are now. To move to a better space, you need to relearn. You need to learn new skills. You need to stretch yourself. You need to challenge and push yourself to move to a different space. So in this episode, we're going to talk about pushing yourself, and pushing yourself in two particularly broad areas. So the first broad area is your psychology. What do great leaders and great managers think like? Does it look any different to the average? Well, absolutely, yes it does. And they think in a different way because they know the thinking creates different results. Key to this is the language you use when you actually talk about yourself, or you talk to yourself, or you describe what you want with people. One of the key tenets that we've learned in psychology is you learn what you believe when you hear yourself say it. This is incredibly important. It's not what you think that generates your beliefs, it's what you say out loud. So when you're saying things about your management or leadership style, about where you want it to be, it's crucially important that you structure the words that suggest that you're moving to the space you want to be in. So what are some of the things that we can actually say we know from a science-based perspective about the psychology of great leaders and great managers? Well, the first thing is that they know what matters to them, what's really important to them. So I've already said that one of the key things that all leadership and management trainers are going to say is you should construct a vision of your personal leadership style. What do you want to look like as a leader? What would it look like if you were the very best leader that you could possibly be? And that comes from what really matters to you. What's important to you? What is your experiences of being led like? What was it like when you were led by somebody who was incredibly awesome at it? And what was it like when you were led by somebody who wasn't that good? As you've already seen, as we move through the episodes, we're going to go into real detail about creating a vision for yourself and creating a vision for your team and your department or wherever context you're working in. But right now, the first question I want you to ask yourself, in order that we can get there when we get to that episode, is when people leave your company. So that not company as in your organisation or your business, but when people leave being with you, what do you want them to feel? Not what do you want them to think. So a few hints. Usually people will come up with things like, I want them to feel motivated. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel invigorated or challenged or whatever language makes sense to you in your personal context. But I want you to actually think of 3 words. And then when we get to creating a vision, we're going to use that to frame your vision of leadership. So 3 words about how you want people to feel when they've interacted with you. And then we're going to talk about what are you good at. And great leaders, great managers know what they're good at, but they also know what they're not good at. Being good at something is fantastic, but the reality is also we need to build on that, and we need to find the things that you need to get even better at. But the starting point right now is to work out what you're good at. Make a list of all the things that you know you do incredibly well. In the Western world, we're often taught to be modest. We're taught to actually hold back when we actually talk about the things that we do really, really well. Often when I'm delivering leadership and management training, I'll say to people, what are you really, really good at? And people start to shuffle. It suddenly seems to be the time that they need to check their phone. This is a moment for you to actually really celebrate this. And again, make a list of what you're good at. What we're doing in today's session is we're building the early blocks that as we move through these 9 episodes together, you're going to build on and build on and build on. So if you like, this is the foundational work. You're going to need those 3 words about how you want people to feel when they interact with you. You're going to need this list of what you're really good at. It doesn't have to be a massive list, unless you're good at masses of things, but create an honest, true list of what you're good at. The psychology of people who are incredibly successful always falls to the same space. They believe they can achieve no matter what. Fundamental to this is a belief that whatever comes along, they can overcome it. If you look at any field, you're going to find that that same mindset exists. It's not that I won't hit hurdles. It's not that I won't encounter challenges. It's not a false, rosy vision of the future. It's a fundamental belief always that I can overcome that. And part of that is the power of what we know is being drawn from positive psychology. So positive psychology is not looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses. It's not saying everything's going to be okay in every moment of every day. But it is saying I've worked out what I'm really good at. I've worked out how to leverage that. And I know that if I work well, I can overcome whatever hurdle comes along. Great leaders and great managers are consistent over the long term. So it's not about having huge peaks and troughs. It's not about going into your workplace and striving and doing incredibly well and burning yourself out. It's about learning to be consistent, performing at a high level all the time on a regular basis. And part of that, again, is being honest about yourself and honest about the challenges that poses, because work is not your whole life. There are other aspects to who you are. But as I said earlier, we also have an area that we haven't touched on much yet, which is the things that you need to get better at. And we all have those things. There's a huge tendency these days for people to talk about our strengths, and you should focus on your strengths, and you should only do what you're good at. You should encourage your employees, your direct reports, again, whatever language makes sense to you, to focus on their strengths. I've been to people's offices where they've got their strengths posted on their door so that we know what they're really good at as you walk in. But hey, let's be honest, sometimes you have to get better at things that you're not good at. Sometimes you've got to get better at things that you don't even like doing. And if you want to move to the next level, and we all know that wherever you're at, there is a next level. If you want to go there, you've got to challenge yourself to do things that you wouldn't normally find comfortable and easy to do. So part of your journey right now is to think about what they are. So we've already created 3 words that describe yourself in terms of how you want people to feel as they leave interacting with you. We've already talked about creating a list of what your strengths are. I want you also to create a list of where you can get better, where you're not already good. So focus on that too. What is it that I need to get better at? And part of this is to be truly honest with yourself. It's not easy. Where, as I said earlier on, we're really good at looking at others and judging others and encouraging others to see the areas that they need to get better at. But sometimes it's hard to look in the mirror and say, hey, you know what? I know I could do better than in this area. If you want to really go to the next level, whatever that next level is for you, then that includes being honest with yourself. And then we come to the next major area, which is your physiology. And often that's been a neglected area for leaders and managers. But we know this body interacts with this mind in a two-way process. So it's not just that the brain affects the body affects the brain too. And you need to be functioning at your personal optimal physiological level in order to actually succeed well in any space you're in. And that needs to be broken into 2 areas. As you can see, your exercise and your nutrition. The top 5% of performers in any workplace in the world are people who exercise and manage their nutrition. As an aside, one of the reasons that there's now a large body of work saying that workplace well-being programs don't work is because it's the people who are already engaged in looking after their exercise and their nutritional needs who are engaging in the process of using workplace well-being programs. So I want you to be totally honest with yourself. Where could you get better with your exercise? Where could you get better with your nutrition? You personally are your only resource here. So you need to look after yourself. This is a long game. We've already said high performance is performing consistently over the long term. So you really need to ensure that you optimize your chance of being here over the long term. One of the things that gets in the way for people is they start a new diet, they start a new exercise program, and then they struggle to stay connected to it. If that's you, look out for the episode on motivation, because that's what we're going to talk about there, is how do you stay connected to it? What happens when you commit to something and it falls away? Also, we'll touch a little bit in that space when we're talking about goals, that maintaining a goal is one of the key strategies. So having talked about the things that I want you to do, we've talked about the need for you to create 3 words that describe how people will feel when they leave your company. We've talked about creating a list of what you're really, really good at. We've talked about creating a list of what you could be better at. And I want you to think about, in that list, does it include exercise and nutrition? Because if it does, they should be in that list. There's 2 other things I want you to take away from today's session. The most important of all is that you need to invest in yourself. If you want to go to the next level, it's not going to happen accidentally. You need to take a plan and work out, how am I going to move to that next space? That may mean that you invest in a coaching program, in being coached by somebody who has a leadership coaching background. It may mean that you find a mentor, somebody who's already at the level you want to get to. That interaction with other human beings is incredibly powerful, because going back to what I said earlier on, we often struggle to honestly display who we really are, to honestly judge who we are, to look in the mirror and see our flaws. We've become used to them, so we accept that, well, that's who we are. Having a coach or a mentor can often be that person who holds the mirror up to you and says, hey, but Johnny, in this area you need to improve. But also reading. The highest performers in any field read consistently. So find where you want to be. If you want to be a great leadership person, if you want to be a great manager, if you want to move to X space, read consistently about it. And that all includes setting learning goals. I'd like you to think about, often we create goals about achieving things. I want to achieve X by Y. I want to achieve, submitting 15 reports within the next quarter, whatever it would be. But we forget to set learning goals. What is it I want to learn about in this next month? What is it I want to learn about next week? I should be able to pick your diary up and see that you've got a time slot that's allocated for learning. So in preparation for where we'll go in the future, think about investing in yourself. What does that actually mean? What would you benefit from in terms of an investment process? And think about, what do you want to learn? And set at least 12 learning goals for the year that should stack on top of each other. So from this month I intend to learn this, the month after this, the month after that, and so on and so on and so on. So until we meet again, I would ask you to really genuinely commit to this process. And then as we move into our next space together in the next episode, we'll talk about the followers. How do you bring people on board in this process? How do you get people to be managed by you? How do you get people to be led by you? So speak to you again soon.